Hi everyone. This is the presentation on China I was promising. It took a long time to produce because I took a long time, well, finishing things up, but it's finally here. So yeah, as we can see, these are the symbols for China. We've got the symbol meaning center or middle, and then the symbol meaning country. So it's going to be read somehow in Chinese. I don't know how to read it in Mandarin. I could read it in Japanese, but wouldn't make much sense with it. So these are the essential facts you need to know here. So first, this is China, the country in red, in more ways than one. This is Taiwan here, and whether you include Taiwan in China is up for debate. And actually, we will cover this in the presentation. And yeah, this area here is circled because famously, there's more people living inside the circle than outside the circle, which is well, kind of something to think about. But yeah, I mean, this includes China and India and Southeast Asia, and these are all very, very densely populated countries, and yeah, lots of people in here. Which also means that these countries are very, very powerful. China and India are emerging superpowers. China, you could say that in more ways than one, is already the superpower to beat. So, um, yeah, we've got the statistics here. Okay, we already covered them in class, but we've got that it's 9.6 million square kilometers, and it's the third largest country in the world if you measure only land. What do I mean with this? That if you included also sea, then the United States would be the third largest country. Uh, but if you only measure land, then it's China. We've got a population of over 1.4 billion, and it's the second largest population in the world now. It's the second largest, India being the largest population. This overtake of India in population happened, I think it was in 2023, 2022, but it was very recent. China had been the most populated country in the world for a very long time. Now it's India. But yeah, nevertheless, there's still many, many people living there. Then it's officially atheist. There's no official religion, but of course, there's plenty of religions being professed there. Buddhism, possibly the most popular one there. Then we've got Taoism, Islam, Christianity. Islam, of course, there's a specific area in the country where Islam is practiced here in Xinjiang. So Beijing is the capital and it's the political center, but funnily enough, it's not the most important city for all purposes. For that would be Shanghai probably. And then we've got other very important cities like Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and Chengdu. I cannot pronounce these names, and I'm very sorry. I promise next year I'll learn how to produce these cities in something resembling Chinese pronunciation. So the official language is Mandarin, and most people at least understand Mandarin, and most people can speak Mandarin. It's the official language for the country, and it's what the TVs speak, and it's what it's used in education and everything. But it's not the only language. Okay, we've got other variations of Chinese, other dialects of Mandarin. We've got other languages that are completely different. Okay, we've got Tibetan, we've got Uyghur, and these two are completely different languages, and of course, the distinction between a dialect and a language is a bit difficult to make sometimes, but yeah, we've got Cantonese and Shanghainese, which are spoken in, well, guess where. But yeah, Mandarin still is the most important language in the country because basically it's the language of power. So China enters the United Nations. The UN means the United Nations. The International Monetary Fund in the World Bank in 1945. 1945 being the end of the Second World War. So, right when the Second World War finished, China entered these organisms. And then in the United Nations, China has a permanent seat and holds veto power. This is also the case with Russia, which we studied, and it's going to be the case with basically no, well, not every country we study, but yeah, very important countries have these privilege. Then also joined the World Trade Organization in 2001 and is a founding partner of BRICS, okay, which we studied when we were dealing with Russia. Okay, and BRICS again is kind of a counterbalance to the G12. BRICS is, well, these countries here: China, not China, and Russia, India, Iran here that looks like a snail, and we've got Brazil, South Africa, and other countries. Which, yeah, between all of them, they got together to act as a counterbalance. It's an organization that definitely exists, and they're definitely helping each other in some aspects. Okay, it's still not kind of complete trade partnership, but it's still important. So, China borders 14 countries by land, okay, which is Afghanistan, Bhutan, India, Kazakhstan, North Korea, Kyrgyzstan, Laos, Mongolia, Myanmar, which was called Burma some time ago. That's why I include it here. Then Nepal, Pakistan, Russia, Tajikistan, and Vietnam. It also has maritime borders, and that's with Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and Taiwan. Of course, again, if Taiwan is a border, is something that we need to discuss. So I included as a border, and if you mention it as a border, I'll accept it. However, if you said no, it's not a border, well, that's also something that you can defend. This is the map of China, and you should be familiar with this. You should be familiar with China being surrounded by these natural borders. And we mentioned when we were dealing with Russia how important natural borders are, and how Russia not having natural borders affected its priorities. Okay, well, China has very, very strong natural borders. We've got the Tibetan Plateau here, the Himalayas. We've got um, the Taklamakan Desert here, the Gobi Desert, and the Altai Mountains here. In general, it's well defended, and this area is what we generally call China, even though China has been changing in its extension depending on what period of history you're talking about. Here we've got Beijing. Remember, Beijing being here was important because the Manchus could invade, which ended up happening. But yeah, Beijing's position had been traditionally important, even though the center of power, at least economically, has been progressively moving south towards, for example, Nanjing, which had been the capital for a long time, and also Shanghai, which is now maybe the most important city in China. Okay. We've got two important rivers that you need to know. It's the Yellow River and the Yangtze River. The Yellow River can also be called the Huanghe. And these are the longest and the most historically significant rivers in China. The most important, most relevant mountain range is the Himalayas, with, of course, Mount Everest, which is the tallest mountain in the world. And then we've got the Gobi and the Taklamakan deserts, which are the most notable desert regions. And then we've got the East China Sea and the South China Sea, important. And especially the South China Sea is very important for China right now because many of its priorities lie exactly there in the South China Sea. So, now about the climate. China's climate is important, but maybe not as relevant as it was in the case of Russia. Remember that when we dealt with Russia, we mentioned the climate as being one of the most important elements to understand what Russia is about. Uh, well, in the case of China, there's still important things that we need to understand about the climate. We have to see that this red area here is desertic and therefore acts as a very important natural border. And we have to see that there's a very, very important division, and the important division is north and south. Okay, so this north and south division has economic and social consequences. Okay, so for example, in the north, it snows in winter, and also we grow wheat in the north instead of rice, which is what is grown in the south. And also, gradually, China's south has been uh, growing in importance. Okay, then also China's richest cities right now are in the south. Okay, and also part of the reason is that China's most important ports are also situated in the south. And why we place these ports in the south is something that you should already know, because this was relevant when we studied Russia, which is that if you place ports too far north, well, ice is a problem there. Okay, Russia, for example, cannot use part of its ports in the north because they freeze over in winter. So yeah, that's well, that's one of the reasons why. Of course, if you go to China South, you're nearer some important countries like the Philippines and Vietnam, and in general, you're also closer to maritime trade with India and and Europe. Okay. Now we're going to start dealing with history here. Uh, history. I tried to condense history as much as possible, and actually, this first slide is kind of a very, very condensed overview of what Chinese history is about. Okay, so what we know is that at least 1.7 million years ago, there were people living in China. Okay, and then these people had already invented at least primitive agriculture in the new, had gone through the Neolithic Revolution at least 6,000 years ago. And then we start Chinese historiography. Okay, so we've got first ancient China. Okay, with three dynasties. Okay, Xia dynasty, Shang dynasty, and Zhou dynasty. With the Xia dynasty not being completely confirmed. I mean, there's references to the Xia dynasty, but there's no direct proof of the existence of the Xia dynasty. So right now we suppose it existed, okay, and therefore we can say for sure that there have been people in China forming something similar to the current Chinese civilization at least for 4,000 years, which is a long time. Then we've got that the Chinese language, some evidence of which is found more than 4,000 years ago, um, starts forming from oracle bones and then into clerical script. And then we've got that in this ancient Chinese period, Confucianism is, devised or imagined. Legalism, Taoism, and the Mandate of Heaven are all created, imagined, introduced into the Chinese civilization in this period. So it's a very important period. And then we get to Imperial China. Imperial China is the longest period. Okay, and we've got the Qin dynasty established the empire. Qin being a name that should remind you of something, and then we've got these successive periods of unification and breaking of the empire, which teaches you something important about how difficult it is to keep an empire um, united. And the basic problem with China, and this is this. Aphorism that I wrote on the board, and I said that the empire long united must divide, and the empire long divided must unite. That's basically because if you look at the borders, well, you see that the external borders are very strong. So you tend towards a unification of China, but also the internal borders and long distances lean themselves into a division of China. Okay, so again, we will see this happening. Then, every time there was these periods of unification and breaking, there was an expansion of territory. Then we must understand that China, throughout all of this, has always been the central power in the region. Okay, with the exception of probably 1 century between the middle of the 19th century and the middle of the 20th century. But China has always been the most important um, nation, country, state in East Asia. So some very important inventions happened in China: paper, gunpowder, printing, and the compass. And then also, towards the end of Imperial China, what we have is the Qing Dynasty, the Opium Wars, and the Century of Humiliation. Very important to understand the Chinese mindset, this Century of Humiliation. And then modern China is since the fall of the Qing Empire in 1912, then the Republic of China, then the Civil War, the Communist Party, industrialization, and then China becoming a worldwide economic power. Okay, so let's begin with history of China, and then we've got ancient China. I decided to summarize all of this into one slide. You could devote the whole subject to just the matter of ancient China because it's incredibly interesting. And if you have the time and the interest, you could watch the videos that I linked in the classroom. But what you have to know, okay, is that it's developed mostly around the Yellow River in the North China Plain. Okay, it wasn't as big as it is now, China, back then. And then it's from the 21st to the 3rd centuries BCE. Okay, and we've got the Xia dynasty, the Shang dynasty, and the Zhou dynasty, three successive dynasties. Um, with some periods, of course, as we saw, of breaking down, especially in the Zhou dynasty. The Zhou dynasty compresses an initial period of very strong um, power, central power, and then a gradual breaking down. And but this gradual breaking down was very important, honestly, because that's when many important things happened. Okay, for example, the development of the Chinese language. Okay, so throughout these, well, almost 2 millennia, okay, what we have is Confucianism, developed ethics, family, social harmony. Then Taoism, which I'm not going to mention again, but definitely very important too, by Lao Tzu. Uh, Basically speaks about harmony with the Tao, simplicity, nature, not trying to fix anything, not trying to intervene in the world, not trying to change. You just have to go with the flow, so to speak. And then we've got legalism. Okay, legalism is kind of uh, an inverted ideology because generally you start with an ideology and then this results in some social practices. But legalism, what happened was that, well, there was a social practice which is very strict laws, very specific laws, and very well communicated laws, and then they try to make a philosophy out of it. Okay, so we've got strict laws, centralized government, hierarchical organization of society, and then we've got the mandate of heaven. The mandate of heaven is very simple and very complex simultaneously. Basically, the point to the mandate of heaven is that whoever is in power because he's got the mandate of heaven, of the gods, of the divine. Okay, and if you lose power, it's because, well, you lost the mandate of heaven, and yeah, it's kind of a circular explanation. That's why I don't quite get it, but it's still mentioned in China constantly. So you need to understand that it exists. And then technology throughout these centuries, bronze casting was developed, and silk being very very important to China. And then irrigation, watering, and the first iron tools. Okay, we know that from bronze we'll go towards iron, not because iron is better. It's just that iron is easier to obtain. And then yeah, we go to Confucius. Okay, so Confucius lived in this period of fragmentation in China. Okay, in the Zhou dynasty. So the thing is that because China was fragmenting, suddenly there were more states and more need to acquire people who could write, who could read, who were good at organizing stuff, administrative stuff, to more or less, and then they became these professional civil servants. And what they did is that they didn't necessarily work only in the state they were born in, but they would go to other states and offer their services. Okay, not everyone could read back then. Actually, it's estimated that less than 5% of people back then would be able to read. So being able to read and write was already a very high qualification. If you could count, all the better. And yeah, well, Confucius was one of these guys. He was an administrative, he was a civil servant, and then later he became a teacher. Okay. And well, in this context, what Confucius thought about is how did the Zhou dynasty break down? Because he knew that in the past, the Zhou dynasty had been like unified, it had been great, and he was wondering what the Chinese should do to have a unified um, dynasty again, to have a unified country again. And he thought about that, and thinking about this, he came to many conclusions about how to restore harmony and order. Okay, and then later on in the Han Dynasty, some centuries after him, uh, his ideas became very, very important. His ideas became basically the official philosophy of the empire, which means necessarily that Confucius's ideas are state philosophy and they favor the state, which is something important. And the fact that Lao Tzu was not chosen also means that there's kind of a well, contraposition between Lao Tzu and Confucius in this regard. State philosophy versus a more individual philosophy. Okay, so and then we get to the central point here, which is what is Confucianism. Okay, so Confucius saw society in terms of relationships, okay, and he saw relationships everywhere. He saw that the king and the subjects had a specific relationship, the father and the son, the husband and the wife, two friends, and so on and so forth. Now, he believed that relationships work best, which seems obvious, but work best when both sides fulfill their duties, okay? This introduces the idea of the king also having duties to the subjects of a country, which was kind of new at the point. Okay, and also he gave a very central place in its his philosophy to benevolence. Don't do unto others what you don't want others doing unto you, which is a golden rule of philosophy. Basically, every philosophy everywhere has this basic idea. Well, not everyone, but almost every philosophy, almost every religion has this central idea of, well, be good to the others so the others will be good to you, and so on and so forth. Then, he also saw the importance of rights and names. So everyone should behave according to the name they have. Everyone should behave according to the position they have. Okay, when I say name, I mean the title. Okay, I should behave as a teacher. Okay, I'm not saying I should behave as a Sergi. Okay, that's not important. I could be called another name. But if I am a teacher, I should behave as a teacher. Okay, and that's important. And other people should call me teacher. Okay, and I should behave as a teacher, not as a friend, because that's my position. at least in the relationship we have between me and my students. Okay. And then he also highlighted integrity. Okay, this is very important. Okay, you should act according to what you think you should do, not according to what interests you at the moment, not according to your personal interests. Okay, and then we've got these three items: benevolence, ritual, and integrity. Then, once we are past these ancient China, okay, we've got these bridge dynasties. This is imperial China already, okay? With the Qin dynasty, we begin imperial China, okay? But there's two dynasties, the Qin and Han dynasties, that serve as a bridge between ancient China and imperial China, and they are very formative. They defined what China is, okay? Qin, okay, the Qin dynasty, okay, is led by Qin Shi Huang, who was the first emperor of China, and basically unified China again, and possibly this was the origin of the name China. We cannot be completely sure because there's other theories, okay, but possibly we call it China because of Qin Shi Huang and the Qin dynasty. Then something very important he did was that he centralized and standardized bureaucracy, currency, weights, measures, and the writing system. Very practical if you want to unify a country to have the same currency, the same weights, the same measures, the same bureaucracy, the same way of governing. Okay, and then he also led some important infrastructure projects. The Great Wall already existed, but he kind of pushed forward to with its construction because he could already tell that the Mongols were going to be a problem at some point. And well, he built roads and canals. Okay, well, he ordered the building of roads and canals, and slaves and other people built them. And then he was extremely harsh. He had harsh laws and severe punishments. And this is a very good example of something that works for creating an empire, not working for keeping this empire working, because it didn't. When you have severe a legal system, what you have is an issue in which people will get tired of you imposing gratuitous punishments or too severe punishments. So, and then the dynasty lasts exactly one emperor. Okay, it is true that Qin Shi Huang's son started governing, but basically he couldn't hold on to power. Okay, it was impossible for him to hold on to power, so it was basically him. And then what happened was that there was a fight for power. The empire didn't break down. There was only this fight for power. Okay, and then in 2006 BC, the Han dynasty started. Okay, and then Liu Bang was the first to get to power after this civil war. Okay, there's a very interesting story with Liu Bang, but well, we don't have the time to go into it. But you should look it up. It's an interesting one. And basically, what the Han Dynasty does is it retains the best elements of the Qin Dynasty, centralization and standardization, but it relaxes the laws and it kind of lowers taxes and it relaxes the punishments and everything. Then also promotes Confucianism and state philosophy. Okay, I think this was a very good idea. Okay, basically you promote a specific set of ideas as state philosophy, and if you behave according to these ideals, and which were very well organized ideals already. Okay, so instead of creating a new state philosophy, you take something that you know already works. Then during this dynasty, which lasted for 4 centuries, a long time, paper was invented, very important invention. Okay, and then also the Silk Road was introduced. The Silk Road is this road that goes from China to Europe. Okay, and we know that there was some second-hand contact between the Han Empire and the Roman Empire, which is very exciting to think about. And then the Han Empire expanded the territory significantly, okay, and made it a lot more like what we now know as China, okay. If you look at the map, it's not as big as China is now, but well, it kind of starts looking like it. And then in the third century AD, basically, it falls down, it breaks down. Okay, we will see this happening again and again. Has happened in the past, will continue happening. Okay, and then we've got Imperial China. Now we've got first this first century of Imperial China. Okay, to 20 CE to 1279 CE. We've got these successive periods of fragmentation, reunification, nomadic invasions, and instability in the north. The north was a constant source of trouble for the Chinese. And we've got first the Sui dynasty that reunifies China in 589 CE. And then what they did, importantly, was land redistribution. Okay, this is going to be a constant. This happens not only in China, but in most countries in the world. Okay, if you at some point land needs to be redistributed because you get these landowners who possess too much land, and then you cannot have a working government with people who are too powerful under you, basically. So what happens is land redistribution and the Grand Canal. The Grand Canal is a canal that, well, it's a series of canals actually, but all together they form the Grand Canal that joins the Yellow River with the Yangtze River. Okay, very important construction. Okay, took a lot of effort, took a lot of people dying. And then the Tang Dynasty, which starts right after the Sui Dynasty. No time for breaking down at that moment. Okay, there was significant economic growth, significant military expansion. It's a golden age of art and literature, and Chang'an, which was the capital at the time, becomes a regional trade hub. Okay, again, China already was, but it's more and more becoming the central power in East Asia. And then the Song Dynasty. Okay, Song Dynasty is incredibly important for China. It's peak imperial China maybe, and what we have here is economic growth, technological innovations. Printing was invented in the Song Dynasty. Okay, 500 years before it was invented in the West, which is definitely something. Then we've got gunpowder. Okay, gunpowder technically had been invented before, but well, at that time it was used in weapons. Before it was only used for fireworks, which I kind of prefer, but they had the invention, like the idea of killing people with it. And then compass. The compass, again, not the one you use to make circles with, but the one that points to the north. Compasses are important if you want to travel long distances. And then Hangzhou became the most populous city in the world at the time. And in the Song Dynasty, as had happened during, well, centuries before, there was a constant threat from the Mongols. Okay, and this threat was realized in 1271 when Kublai Khan became the emperor of China. Okay, then the Mongols controlled not only China but actually most of Asia, including, as we saw when we studied Russia, the Kievan Rus. Okay, and then the Mongols, however, if you can remember when we studied the Kievan Rus precisely, the Vikings conquered this territory, settled this territory, and then the Vikings kind of became Slavs. Okay, they didn't try to keep their original culture, their original Viking culture. But this didn't happen with the Mongols. The Mongols decided not to become Chinese. Okay, of course, it was also a shorter period, but the thing is, the Mongols remained privileged and distinct from the Han. Okay, then Beijing was established as the capital there very intelligently. Okay, because the Mongols could recognize that that was a very important point to control if they wanted to keep China safe. And there was greater contact with Europe, and Marco Polo happened at this point. Okay, Marco Polo was this Venetian tradesman who traveled to China actually stayed in China for decades and then went back to Europe and explained what he had seen, only to not be believed by many. Actually, many people thought that he had made up all these stories about this great land of riches and such in the East. Oh well. Anyway, what happened was that after approximately a century, this Yuan dynasty just didn't stop working. In great part because the Mongols didn't want to make it work very well. I mean, the Mongols were not interested in running the state very much, and then there was corruption, incompetence, mismanagement, and also what happened too was that the Black Death, the bubonic plague that had affected Europe, also affected Asia, and the Mongols didn't make a good job of managing this plague, and well, this meant the end for the Mongols, and they basically went back to their land after a century of occupying China. So and then the Ming Dynasty starts. Okay, the Ming Dynasty, very important. Okay, and it's a period of change for China because suddenly China, that had been relatively isolated from the world, is increasingly trading and contacting the rest of the world. Okay, this Ming Dynasty will last from 1368 to 1644, and in this period, what we'll have is that the Ming dynasty will form a powerful army, okay, and it will trade and have conflicts with other imperial powers, okay, and at that time we're talking Portugal, the Netherlands, and especially Spain, okay, and I say especially Spain because lots of the silver that was acquired from America by the Spanish was then taken to China to buy luxury goods. Okay, so it's there's this kind of funny map in which you can see that out of all the silver that went to Spain, a big percentage ended up in China because the Spanish kept spending it in silk and paper and all these Chinese luxuries. And in the Ming Dynasty, it's extremely clear that China is a central power in the region and it's uncontested. Okay, but then comes the Qing Dynasty. Now, the Qing Dynasty is going to be the last dynasty in Imperial China, and it starts off relatively well. Okay, it starts off with the Manchu forces capturing Beijing, and basically Manchuria and China becoming the same thing. Okay. Nevertheless, the Manchus, like the Mongols before, didn't completely integrate in the Han society. Okay, it was notable, and the Han Chinese could see that the Manchus that were governing them were not part of them. This will mean certain things afterwards. Okay, so basically, 1644, the Manchu capture Beijing and take control of China gradually. Okay, it was a quick thing, but not an instantaneous thing. And then up until the beginning of the 19th century, the Qing dynasty worked pretty well. Okay, it was expansion and stability and being the central power in the area and one of the great powers in the world. Okay, however, right at the end of the 18th century, we already have some issues. There's the White Lotus Rebellion by the Han against the Manchu rulers. And this is kind of the beginning of the problem. So, what we have is a Manchu dynasty, Manchu royalty, that great parts of the Chinese society didn't accept as their legitimate rulers. Okay, but that is not going to be the biggest problem for the Manchus, because the biggest problem for the Manchus would come from Britain. Okay, so the British had undergone an industrial revolution that made them very powerful, okay, and also led them to build more powerful weapons, more powerful ships, and have a very, very, very productive economy. And after some trade conflicts over the British selling opium to the Chinese, there was the first Opium War in 1839. Okay, and China lost the war against the British, and this means the beginning of the century of humiliation for China. Okay, for the Chinese Empire, and then basically this ends with the British victory, and it means that the Chinese lose control over trade. They cannot decide what they want or will trade with the British. Okay, and this means the Treaty of Nanjing. The Treaty of Nanjing basically establishes that the British soldiers and British tradesmen and businessmen cannot be judged by the Chinese, and they're free to do as whatever they please. Okay, and then in 1850, a decade after the First Opium War, there is a Taiping Rebellion against the Qing dynasty. But actually, in this rebellion, the foreign forces, the British, and by the time there were already all other countries there, well, the other forces helped the Qing dynasty crush this rebellion because, well, the other forces estimated that it was in their interest to keep the Qing in power. Okay, so the Taiping Rebellion in 1850, very bloody. It's one of the most bloody wars in history. Millions and millions of people died in this rebellion. Okay, um, but yeah, basically it proved that the Han Chinese were controlled by the Qing and also controlled by foreign forces. Okay, so they were not deciding their own destiny, their own destiny. Good. And then we've got in 1856 the Second Opium War, which means even more concessions to the colonial forces. Okay, by this time, the Qing dynasty had very, very little power, little control over their own country. Some control, but not much. And then there was in 1894 a war against Japan, which was especially humiliating for the Chinese because losing against the British is one thing, but losing against the Japanese, who the Chinese had always seen as kind of a little brother, okay, kind of a junior partner, kind of a small country that was always subservient to the Chinese, well, that was pretty humiliating for them. And then, well, in this war, China lost Taiwan, okay, and then also lost other trade concessions and such and so on. Also, basically, at this point, I mean, if in the Second Opium War, the Qing had already lost much control, by the 1900s, the Qing have almost zero control over their own territory. And then in the 1900s, there's a Boxer Rebellion. Okay, this Boxer Rebellion is by the Han Chinese, but actually the Qing dynasty supports the rebellion by this time because they are aware that basically they are under the boot of imperialist forces like the British mostly, but also the German, the French, the Japanese. And however, the Boxer Rebellion didn't work out. And by 1911, there's yet another rebellion, the Xinhai Rebellion, Xinhai Revolution, which means to the abdication of the last Qing emperor, Puyi. And by 1912, the establishment of the Republic of China. Okay, and then I want to put some emphasis here. Okay, we need to understand what the century of humiliation is. It's a period between the First Opium War in 1839 and the end of World War II in 1945, which we still have to see. But it's basically called the century of humiliation in China, and it's an important part of how they see themselves and the world around them. Okay, and they lost control over their own country to the British, and also to other imperialist countries such as France, Germany, or Japan. Okay, Japan is especially humiliating for them probably, and many of the decisions in recent years have been made with this in mind. Okay, so this is a big part of the self narrative of China, how China explains the world and China to themselves. Then, after this Xinhai Revolution, okay, what we have is the Republic of China, formed in Nanjing, Nanjing being the capital at this point, okay, at this specific point, okay, and then Sun Yat-sen, very important figure. Sun Yat-sen is the leader of the revolution against the republic, against the monarchy, against the Qing dynasty, and becomes the leader of the revolution and becomes the leader of the Republic of China. But as soon as he gets to power, he decides to give power to another person in what is probably a very intelligent move because, as we saw before, what works for acquiring power doesn't always work for keeping power. And he gives it to Yuan Shikai, which was maybe not the best idea. I mean, the act of ceding power was good. The act of ceding it to Yuan Shikai was probably not very intelligent because this guy tried to become an emperor. Um, didn't work out, however. Okay, and in 1916, okay, he abdicated from the throne. He also abdicated from life because he died too. And after this, this creates a power vacuum, and then a period of fragmentation in China starts. Okay, which will actually last for decades. Okay, everything we explain from now until 1949 is in a period of in which China is not completely whole. There's fragmentation. Okay. Then in 1919, there's the May 4th movement. Okay. The May 4th movement is a movement against the Versailles Treaty. Okay. Which kind of let China down because China was an ally of the Allies in the First World War, but he was put aside, and many concessions were made to Japan, and well, they didn't like it, and Sun Yat Sen became again a leader of the Nationalist Party at this point, and Sun Yat Sen saw the communists as allies, as friends, as a powerful alliance against whatever. Okay, and the problem is that in 1925, Sun Yat sen died, and Chiang Kai shek became the leader of the Nationalist Party. And the Nationalist Party changed then because Chiang Kai shek hated the communists with passion. He was extremely anti communist. And even though the Chinese Communist Party and the Nationalist Party fought together to reunify China, right before he was about to declare the Republic of China again, he betrayed the Chinese Communist Party, and this led to many deaths in the Chinese Communist Party. Okay. And then he established the Republic of China with him in power, with Chiang Kai shek in power. Okay. Then in 1931, the Japanese invaded Manchuria, okay, which is this area in the north that you should be able to place in the map, okay. And then when they invaded Manchuria, okay, well, suddenly there's this problem in which the nationalists are still fighting for control over their own country, and the communists are also fighting for control. But then there's the Japanese, which should be a common enemy. I mean, the Japanese were an external force trying to invade China. So it stood to reason that the Nationalist Party and the Communist Party should become allies again. But Chiang Kai shek didn't see it this way. And what happened was that he tried to crush the communists before he tried to fight the Japanese. Okay. And what happened here is that when he tried to crush the communists, okay, he was successful in part because he killed lots of communists, okay, but the problem is that in general, what the population was seeing was that the nationalists were fighting the communists and the communists were fighting the Japanese, which meant that the communists were becoming more popular already by then. Okay. Also, in 1934, what happened was that the nationalists were almost done with the Red Army, with the Communist Army, but they initiated this long march in which they went from this area in the south east of China, walking a very long distance to Yan'an, where there were other communist troops. Okay, so lots of people died in this long march, but this was very iconic, very popular. They gathered lots of support for the communist cause in this long march. Okay, then in 1936, however, Chiang Kai-shek was forced to form a united front with the Chinese Communist Party, and when I say forced, I mean literally forced, because he was kidnapped and he was locked in a house until he signed a document saying that the Nationalist Party would become an ally of the Communist Party against the Japanese. He was kidnapped by his own nationalist allies. By the way, it was not the communists; it was the nationalists themselves who said, okay, the priority has to be fighting the Japanese, and they did fight the Japanese. Okay, and in 1937, the Second Sino-Japanese War happened. Okay, remember, two different wars. Okay, there's the first Sino-Japanese War, which is in 1894, and the second one in 1937. And in 1937, what happened was the rape of Nanjing, which is a massacre perpetrated by the Japanese in the city of Nanjing, which is it's horrible and interesting at the same time. I don't know if you want read about it, but I have to warn you, it's a very cruel thing, and the images are not nice. And it's important to understand how the Chinese and feel about the Japanese up to this day, by the way, because this happened less than a century ago. The Chinese very much remember what the Japanese did, and in 1945, Japan surrendered, and therefore the Sino-Japanese War finished. There was a brief Soviet invasion of Manchuria and Korea, but then this resolved. They left. And then started the civil war between nationalists and the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, and this ended up with the Chinese Communist Party winning. Many reasons for this. Okay, one of the most important reasons is, as we have mentioned, they had popular support. Okay, most of the people in China supported the communists because, well, they had seen the nationalists behaving in a certain way in the previous 2 decades. And what happened was that the Nationalist Party fled to Taiwan. Okay, which had been given back to China in 1945. Okay? And this is the history of Taiwan. It's very quick. Okay, basically, 1895, Japan takes control of Taiwan, and then in 1945, the Republic of China takes back control of Taiwan. Then in 1949, Taiwan is occupied by nationalist forces, and then martial law and a dictatorship is declared until 1987, which is 4 decades, a long time. And then initially, the Republic of China was recognized as the legitimate government of China, but the problem is that most of the territory was controlled by the by the People's Republic of China, okay, by the communist government. So by the 1970s, basically the world started recognizing the Republic of China instead of the Republic of China as the legitimate government. And then in the 90s and the 2000s, Taiwan transitioned gradually into a democracy and also localized. What I mean with localized is that they started becoming Taiwan and they started forgetting about they being the legitimate government of China. Not everybody, of course, okay? And there's still a part of the Taiwanese society that feels they are the legitimate government of China and still want to keep the conflict open, okay? But nevertheless, this seems to be the direction things are going in, okay? And also, some semi official relationships have been restored with China, transport, trade, and the postal service, okay? And then Taiwan now seems to be aspiring to become a sovereign nation, okay? Just to become completely independent, to be able to say, okay, this is Taiwan, we have our place in the United Nations, we have a place in the World Trade Organization, but China doesn't want this to happen, and it's kind of a tension. Okay, we will look into this tension a bit more later on. So then we've got in China, we've got Mao Zedong first. Okay, and Mao Zedong, China initially had support from the USSR. But around the 60s, what happened was that China decided that they didn't want to become one of the socialist republics. They didn't want to become part of the USSR, okay, which was the intention by the USSR, which would have been great for the USSR. Okay, I mean, China becoming one of them would have been great, but it didn't happen. Okay, China wanted to become kind of its own things, not be aligned either with the Soviets or with the capitalists, even though they were very much communist government. Okay, just they just didn't want to align with the rest of them. And then Mao had well, pros and cons to Mao. Okay, he did unify China. He did solidify the control of China by the central government, and some in some aspects, China improved very much. Okay, um, literacy improved. There were land reforms which were very important. Healthcare also improved. Okay, however, some of his experiments with governing China were not as successful. Especially, there was one experiment called the Great Leap Forward, by which basically China had to become a great commune. Well, that didn't work out, and this led to millions of deaths, basically because of mismanaging of the country here. And then in 1972, the People's Republic of China replaced the Republic of China, which now we know by the name of Taiwan, in the United Nations. And this is very important, okay? Basically, China becomes one of the most important countries in the world, okay? And then with Deng Xiaoping, which I marked with a star because I think it's basic to understand Deng Xiaoping and basic to understand socialism with Chinese characteristics. Okay, he became the power. He became the leader, even though he was not the one designed by Mao Zedong. Okay, but after a brief power struggle, he became de facto the leader. Okay, and he made China become kind of a mixed economy. Now, what this means is that China is still very much a socialist country, but there are some free market areas and some limited private sector. Okay? The state is still in control, remains firmly in control, and actually, when we get to the present, we will see that this hasn't changed. Okay? The state is very much in control. But there's some space for some private ownership, some free market, some private sector. Okay, this is key because when you compare it with the USA, what happens is that in the 1970s, in the same period, the USA decided to go the other way, which is to basically give up control of their own economy and let the private sector do their thing. This has worked in two different ways. So the Chinese economy grew very much, okay, and especially in the 1980s, we started seeing that China was becoming the world's factory, okay, with made in China products appearing everywhere, okay, and then hundreds of millions of Chinese were lifted out of poverty, okay. So this was a great moment for China, okay, and then, however, there are there's a dark side to this, okay? And first, population control was put in place, okay? Population control is basically, whereas Mao Zedong thought that the more Chinese, the better, okay? That population growth was always going to be good. Deng Xiaoping thought that the the Chinese population had to be controlled, and he established the one family per child policy that was not exactly popular because, of course, this presents with many issues, okay, which we already dealt with in class. And then in 1989, there was a very, very well shameful moment in the government of Deng Xiaoping in Tiananmen. Okay, there were some protests against corruption and in favor of greater freedom of speech. Okay, and basically, what the government did was meeting these protests with harsh repression in what became basically a massacre. They killed people, they wounded thousands of people who were protesting against the government. Then, in the 90s and the 2000s, okay, we're not going to go into specific leaders there, okay, but basically what we have is that in these 2 decades, economic growth remains very strong, but there start to be some issues with natural resources first and then the environment, okay. Then also, something that continues to be a problem is that rural areas didn't benefit as much as urban areas from this growth. Okay, and there's some very, very strong disparities in China between the rural and the urban populations. Okay, also they recovered some territories that they had lost centuries ago during the century of humiliation. Hong Kong and Macau were returned in 97 and 99. Okay. And then also China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. Then we get to Xi Jinping, which is the current president of China. And this is an important slide again. Okay. He started with some anti corruption campaigns and basically purges. He kind of cleaned up the Chinese Communist Party, okay, and he decided to kind of take back control of the economy, okay. Whereas many people will tell you that China has become a capitalist society. This is very much not the case. And socialism is still very much in control. And actually, in the last decade, this has been reinforced. Okay. Regulation, state owned enterprises, and golden shares. Golden shares are a system by which, even in private enterprises, the government has a small part of the enterprise, and the government can decide over some key aspects of these enterprises and companies. Okay, then Xi Jinping has been fighting against poverty. Okay, even though it continues to be a problem. Okay, but this seems to be a problem of every large country. Okay, there will be mm, a sector of the society that will not participate from its wealth as much. He has been fighting against this, but with, well, an equal result. Okay. Now, also, in the foreign policy, okay, and I kind of skipped over this in class, and I would like to enter into this in detail. Now, the 10 dash line, we will see this later, but the 10 dash line is this um, area of the South China Sea, okay, that China claims for themselves. Now, of course, some other countries protest against this, but China is very powerful right now. So it's difficult to protest against China right now. Then also the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative is a series of infrastructure efforts in other countries that are serving for China to have better communications with the rest of the world, including roads and ports and other facilities and infrastructures built. Most notably in Africa, actually, because China is identifying that Africa will be a place where much economic growth will happen in the next few decades, and China wants to be part of that. Okay. Also, there's strong competition with the US. Okay, both economically and also up to a certain point militarily. Okay, the US continues to be the strongest military in the world, but China is trying to contest this. Also, censorship and mass surveillance have increased under Xi Jinping. Okay, censorship meaning the government controlling what you can or cannot say or show, and also mass surveillance. Okay, cameras everywhere, surveillance of your internet activities, and so on and so forth. To be fair, this is happening everywhere. Okay, I mean, all governments are increasing their surveillance, but in China, even more so. And also, during Xi Jinping's government, even though this started happening before, the internment and re-education camps in Xinjiang mean a complete disregard for human rights for a sector of the population. Okay. So, again, Xi Jinping, important figure, current president of the of China, and basically he's going to be for life. What I don't know is how much longer he will live. So next, China's identity. I think this is important. Okay, and if we want to know how the Chinese see themselves, how the Chinese form their identity, these are some key elements. Okay, basically, a civilization spanning over 4,000 years. This is important. The Chinese citizens, all of them, know that their civilization is old, that their civilization is ancient, and they have been a continuous civilization there for over 4,000 years. This is a key element of the Chinese identity. Also, Confucian philosophy. Okay, everyone knows Confucius. Not everyone understands Confucius, but then again, probably I don't understand Confucius either. Um, then the century of humiliation. This is a very, very important thing to understand. Many of the decisions that are taken are seen with the perspective of the rest of the world taking advantage of China not that long ago. Also, socialism. Okay, this very special mix of socialism with some elements of private sector, free market is very, very characteristic of China, and we need to understand it if we want to understand China. So now, going into the geopolitical issues, what we have here is first Xinjiang, as I mentioned. Okay, it was occupied in the 19th century. Okay, so even though it's been a long time, it hasn't been such a long time. Okay, Xinjiang was a different country, different region a couple centuries ago. So, well, I mean, the Chinese haven't managed to make the Xinjiang population feel Chinese yet, even though they're definitely trying. Okay, they're trying in two ways. First, lots of Han Chinese are moving into Xinjiang, but also these re-education and internment camps. Xinjiang is being surveilled, is being controlled, and there are revolts and there are protests. Okay, but nevertheless, Xinjiang is kept inside China. It's very important for China to keep this province inside China. The window for a possible independence of Xinjiang is closing rapidly. Okay, but still, there is a conflict there. Okay, they have their own language, the Uyghur language, and they have their own religion. Okay, so also Tibet, very similarly. Okay, it has been occupied during. It was occupied during the 1950s, but there is a caveat here. Okay, it was occupied during the 1950s, but it had been closely connected to China for many centuries, since the Mongol invasion at least. So it was formally occupied in the 1950s, but China had some power over the Tibet for many centuries. Okay, so the Western powers have disputed, and some Western powers, especially the United States, have supported the claim for independence of Tibet, but it has been kind of indirectly. Okay, no Western power has tried to fight for Tibetan independence. Um, so the big issue here is that economically it has been very profitable for Tibet to become part of China, because now they have road connections and railway connections and basically contact with the rest of the world thanks to China. Okay, nevertheless, the Dalai Lama, for example, is still a very influential figure. Okay, and then we've got the South China Sea, which we mentioned before. China needs the South China Sea. Okay, they really need to control it. Okay, trade, energy, security reasons. But there's other problems. Okay, basically, um, the South China Sea has been polished by the United States for many decades, and now what the United States is saying is that now they cannot just freely navigate this sea, because China is claiming this sea and saying, no, we control this sea. Okay. Of course, other countries also protest against these. We've got here Vietnam, we've got here Malaysia and the Philippines, and they are all not very happy with this happening. And of course, Taiwan. The matter of Taiwan will be covered in a couple minutes, but in general, what we have here is that China wants to control this region. The rest of the world has their opinions about China controlling this region, and then Taiwan. Now, basically, the facts here. Okay, the People's Republic of China claims it as part of the territory. And the US would theoretically support Taiwan if there is an actual invasion by China. But they wouldn't if they declare independence. So Taiwan is kind of in the middle. Okay. And there's actual geopolitical and economic interest in the island. Okay. So there's very important chip manufacturing companies there. It is an important spot for the USA, and also this means free access to the Pacific Ocean for China. So the USA has an interest, China has an interest, and Taiwan itself has an interest. Okay, and the basic questions that we need to make ourselves are the two governments still in a state of civil war? Okay, is it one nation and two states? This is the one big question. Then another big question: could they be unified under the one country, two systems? Okay, because this has happened in the past. For example, Hong Kong was unified, but Hong Kong still keeps some semblance of self-governing. So could this happen to Taiwan? Maybe they could just become some sort of autonomous region inside of China. Do they want to do that? Or have they just become two separate countries? Okay, and this is the big issue here. Okay, now and then the US. Okay, the USA. Well, now they're the two largest economies, depending on how you measure it. One or the other are the most important economies. Okay, and they are trade partners, but they are also rivals. Okay, so they trade with each other constantly, but at the same time, they are rivals. Now, uh, some things are becoming matters in which they have discussions over trade practices, technological advancements, and then also the presence of the US in the Asia Pacific, especially in this area I mentioned, the South China Sea. Well, these are things that they are having a discussion over. And then they also represent two ways of understanding how society, or more specifically economy, should be run. Okay, and then there is a comparison to be made with the Cold War, but the situation is not the same. I mean, there is a semblance of Cold War going on between the US and China, but it's not exactly the same as it was. But let's see how it goes in the future, because, well, there is a tense situation. And then culture. Okay, now we finished with history. We can relax a bit. This is a more relaxed subject. Culture, porcelain has been very, very important for China. It is literally called China in English. Okay, so you can take out the China when some people come home and to serve them uh, coffee in the best cups. Okay, um, it has been produced in China for many, many thousands of centuries. Okay, and it's popular all around the world. Okay, and also silk. Silk is very important. Okay, the Silk Road was called like this because it was the basic product that people wanted to get from China. Okay, um, then we've got painting. I didn't mention this as important, okay, but there's definitely some very important paintings. Um, Among them, Travelers Among Mountains and Streams and The Nymph in the Lua River. Okay, then jade carving. This is very cool. I really like it. Okay, and of course, mostly when you see this nowadays, it's basically an imitation made of uh, tinted glass, maybe plastic. Okay, but well, I don't know. It has been important for many centuries. Then calligraphy is very cool. I mean, Chinese characters are definitely cool, and as shown by many people tattooing themselves, these Chinese characters, they look amazing. And Chinese calligraphy has been very important. Okay, also the Terracotta Army. It was discovered in 1974, not a long time ago. Well, I mean, 50 years ago already. But yeah, it represents the armies of Qin Shi Huang. It's mind blowing. Look it up. Look up a video on this on YouTube, because it's shocking. It's super cool. And then we've got some very, very important works by the Chinese architecture and engineering works. We've got the Great Wall of China, the most famous one. Okay, super long. Some sections were already built in the 7th century BCE, so it's incredibly old. Okay, most of the current wall, however, is from the Ming Dynasty. Okay, so old, but centuries old, not thousands of of years old. Most of it. Some sections, yeah. So we've got the Forbidden City in Beijing. Okay, it's a cool place to see too. Okay, the Grand Canal. I mentioned it before. Okay, the world's longest artificial river. Okay, super long, and it links Beijing and Hangzhou, links the Yellow River and the Yangtze River. Okay, so it was construction in sections in the 5th century BC, and then it was unified in the Sui dynasty. Okay, so again, very long time in the works. And then the Three Gorges Dam is a modern addition to these wonders of architecture and engineering. It was completed in 2012 in the Yangtze River. It's the world's largest hydroelectric power station. very impressive too. Okay, and it's kind of a demonstration that China still has it, that China still can do these sort of things. And then food. Okay, first, the Chinese invented pasta. And you'll ask, but pasta is famous in Italy. How come the Italians have pasta? Well, remember Marco Polo? Well, that's why. But yeah, we've got also other very very tasty dishes. All of this you should at some point in your life taste, please. Okay. First, dumplings. Dumplings you probably have already tasted, but in the Japanese version, okay, which are called gyoza. Okay. Well, if you look at this, jiaozi. Well, I don't know how to pronounce this in Japanese in Chinese, but jiaozi is gyoza in Japanese. Okay, and also Peking duck. Okay, very very famous. Also hot pot. Hot pot restaurants are becoming very popular actually now. In Barcelona, there are several hot pot restaurants. I totally recommend that you go and taste it. And then the tea culture. Okay, we already know about tea, but tea is very very important in China. And with this, we're finishing this very long presentation in China about China. I hope it was helpful for you. Any questions you have, feel free to ask them. As soon as we go back to class, I'll tell you about the exam. Thank you.